A judge gets a threat to the judge's life or to the judge's family. Can you imagine a scenario in which liability may attach to individuals beyond the utterer of that threat?
As a prosecutor, there are instances where not the utterer of a threat to an individual. And so to answer your question, yes, I can imagine.
You agree?
Yes, Senator, and if confirmed to the bench, I would follow all Supreme Court precedent and Ninth Circuit precedent.
Mr. Rick, you agree?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, and those doctrines that would provide the legal basis for investigation in those scenarios. So I ask you these questions because right now federal judges are under the worst shadow of physical threat in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of this country. And I have now over a dozen times asked the Marshal Service, will you investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence justifies it? And I point this out because judges across the country need to pay attention to the fact that the Marshal Service won't confirm that it will investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence supports that. And why would that be the case? That would be the case because when you get behind the utterer of a lot of these threats, you run into right-wing conspiracies. Just to finish Senator Blumenthal's point, I hope you realize how ridiculous the four of you look, spouting these preposterous, canned answers in a forum in which A, you're supposed to tell the truth, and B, you're supposed to demonstrate the judicial capacity to make independent, factual decisions in hard cases. What's left if a hard case comes your way as a judge, and let's say the Trump administration is bearing down on that? Why would we ever believe that you would give the litigants a fair hearing and a fair decision with the executive branch leaning in on you to give these ridiculous answers today?
A United States senator looked at 4 federal judicial nominees and said, "I'm sorry to have to say this, but you look ridiculous." He wasn't being cruel, he was being precise. These nominees, people about to be handed lifetime appointments to federal courts, couldn't say that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, couldn't confirm that the Capitol was attacked on January 6th, sitting in a room where they're supposed to demonstrate independent judicial judgment, giving answers that Senator Whitehouse calls preposterous, canned responses, and then he asks the most chilling question in this hearing. Federal judges across America are receiving death threats, the worst in living memory. The U.S. Marshal Service is supposed to protect them. Whitehouse has asked them over a dozen times, will you investigate the networks behind those threats if the evidence justifies it? They won't answer, because behind many of these threats are right-wing networks. And according to Whitehouse, this DOJ would rather not go there, leaving judges exposed. This hearing is about who gets lifetime power over American law and whether those people will use it independently. Subscribe now because this series tracks the confirmation hearings that shape the courts for the next 30 years.
Just to finish Senator Blumenthal's point, I hope you realize how ridiculous the four of you look, spouting these preposterous, canned answers in a forum in which A, you're supposed to tell the truth, and B, you're supposed to demonstrate the judicial capacity to make independent, factual decisions in hard cases. If you can't even sit here and say that Joe Biden won that election or that the Capitol was attacked, what's left if a hard case comes your way as a judge, and let's say the Trump administration is bearing down on that? Why would we ever believe that you would give the litigants a fair hearing and a fair decision if the executive branch was leaning in on you when we can't get a reasonable answer out of any of you with the executive branch leaning in on you to give these ridiculous answers today? I'm really sorry to have to go through this and that you have to go through this, but it would be nice if you could tell your executive branch handlers, for instance, Ms. Clark, I'm supported by Lindsey Graham. He's a friend of President Trump. He's the second senior person on the Republican side in the Judiciary Committee. He's likely to be the next Judiciary Committee chair. I think I'll be okay. I don't need to make myself ridiculous at your direction. It'd be great if you could have said that. It'll be great if your answers were simple and honest here today. It's really disappointing.
What Whitehouse is saying here isn't complicated, and for a general audience, it's worth stating plainly. These 4 people are about to receive lifetime federal judicial appointments. Once confirmed, they cannot be fired. They serve until they choose to retire or die. The entire point of lifetime tenure is to insulate judges from political pressure, so they can rule based on law, not on what powerful people want. But in this hearing room, before they've even been confirmed, they're already giving answers shaped by what the Trump administration wants to hear. They won't confirm that Biden won the 2020 election, a fact certified by every court, every state election official, and every federal agency that reviewed it. They won't confirm the Capitol was attacked, something millions of people watched happen live on television. Whitehouse's point about Ms. Clark is the sharpest specific moment. She's backed by Lindsey Graham, a senior Republican senator friendly to Trump, who may chair the Judiciary Committee. She would have been politically safe giving honest answers. She chose not to anyway. That choice tells you something about the culture these nominees are operating inside. If they won't answer simple factual questions now when there are no consequences for honesty, why would anyone believe they'll resist pressure when a hard case arises and the administration is leaning on them with something at stake? What comes next is where Whitehouse stops making arguments and starts building a legal record, one that reveals something genuinely alarming about who is protecting federal judges right now.
Let me ask a different question, a legal question. A judge, you want to be judges. A judge gets a threat to the judge's life or to the judge's family. Can you imagine a scenario in which liability may attach to individuals beyond the utterer of that threat? Ms. Clark?
As a prosecutor, there are instances where there's some responsibility that is assigned to someone who is not the utterer of a threat to an individual. And so to answer your question, yes, I can imagine.
Do you agree?
Yes, Senator, and if confirmed to the bench, I would follow all Supreme Court precedent and Ninth Circuit precedent.
Mr. Rick, you agree?
Yes, Senator, I would agree with that.
I don't know that I care what you think, Ms. Westerkamp, because you're going to international trade and you're probably not going to see much of this, but do you agree?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, and those doctrines that would provide the legal basis for investigation in those scenarios would include doctrines like, name one, Ms. Clark.
Senator, doctrines that are, if someone is essentially carrying out
Solicitation, would that be
Yes.
one? Solicitation of a
Yes.
threat?
Yes.
Or a conspiracy out of which the threat emerged, would that be another one?
Yes.
Yes. How about, and it's the product of an enterprise under the racketeering statutes. Would that also be another way that liability could extend beyond the utterer?
That is correct, Senator.
Can you think of any others, Ms. Lane, where liability extends beyond the utterer of the threat? What are some of the legal theories that would support that kind of investigation and prosecution?
Senator, the doctrines you mentioned, I would agree with, and I would just look always to the federal law and federal statutes guiding that.
Mr. Recchi?
Senator, I would agree with that. I think you covered the major ones, conspiracy, RICO. There may be other avenues of potential legal liability, but I think you covered the 3 big ones in that scenario.
Ms. Westerkamp, you agree?
Senator, I'm not aware if there are any more with my practice before the Court of International Trade and Court of Federal Claims. It doesn't touch on criminal law.
The legal doctrine question seems abstract until you understand what Whitehouse is building toward, and then it becomes the most important exchange in this hearing. He's not testing legal knowledge for its own sake. He's getting every nominee on record, under oath, in a confirmation hearing, confirming that solicitation, conspiracy, and RICO are valid legal theories under which the people behind a threat can be investigated and prosecuted, not just a person who sent the message or made the call. These are the same doctrines that would apply to anyone who organized, funded, directed, or encouraged a network of threats against federal judges. If an organization coordinates threats against judges, if money moves through that network, if members communicate in furtherance of the threatening activity, RICO applies. Conspiracy applies. Solicitation applies. Every nominee just confirmed that on the federal record. Whitehouse didn't ask these questions because he needed the legal education. He asked them because the answer to what comes next is made far more powerful by having every future federal judge already on record agreeing with the legal framework that should govern it. What he reveals next about the Marshal Service is why all of this matters, and why those doctrines are relevant right now, today, for judges already on the bench.
So I ask you these questions because right now federal judges are under the worst shadow of physical threat in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of this country. And in responding to those threats, we have the United States Marshal Service, which reports to the Department of Justice. And I have now over a dozen times asked the Marshal Service, will you investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence justifies it? That's a super easy question. The answer is, yeah, of course we will. They won't answer that. They won't answer that. And I point this out because judges across the country need to pay attention to the fact that the Marshal Service won't confirm that it will investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence supports that. And why would that be the case? That would be the case because when you get behind the utterer of a lot of these threats, you run into right-wing conspiracies. And this MAGA Department of Justice would rather not go there. And so they leave judges exposed with investigations in which they aren't doing investigative 101 work that you've all identified as plausible legal theories. And we need to fix that.
This closing section is the one that should generate the most public concern, and it's the one that has received almost no coverage. Federal judges are receiving death threats at a level Senator Whitehouse calls the worst in American history. These are not anonymous online complaints. These are documented threats serious enough that the U.S. Marshal Service, the agency specifically created to protect federal judges, is actively involved. The Marshal Service reports to the Department of Justice, and the DOJ under the current administration will not answer a straightforward yes or no question about whether they'll investigate the networks behind those threats. That's not a small thing. Investigation 101, as Whitehouse puts it, means you don't just identify who sent the threat. You follow it back. You find out if someone organized it, funded it, directed it. That's how you dismantle a threat network, rather than just charging individual senders who get replaced immediately. The reason the Marshal Service won't commit to doing that, according to Whitehouse, is that following these threats back leads into right-wing political networks, and the current DOJ has made a choice not to go there. Think about what that means practically. Federal judges across America are making decisions that anger politically organized groups. Those groups generate threats. The agency protecting the judges won't pursue the organizations behind the threats. So the judges are exposed, protected against individual actors, but not against coordinated campaigns. Every nominee in this room just confirmed the legal doctrines that should govern exactly this kind of investigation. Solicitation, conspiracy, RICO. They're all on record saying these are valid legal frameworks. Whether those frameworks ever get applied to the networks Whitehouse is describing, that depends entirely on whether the DOJ that's currently refusing to answer a dozen requests suddenly decides the rule of law applies equally to political allies. The nominees being confirmed today will be on the bench when cases arising from exactly this situation land in front of them. And based on what happened in the first half of this hearing, when they couldn't confirm basic facts about the 2020 election, the question of whether they'll apply the law independently when political pressure arrives has not been answered. Reassuringly, subscribe, because the story of who controls the federal courts and who protects the people in them is one of the most important stories in American democracy right now, and this series is tracking it.